It's strange, isn't it? How sometimes you can walk down a street, your footsteps echoing against the pavement, the hum of the city buzzing softly in the distance, and yet, something about it feels off, like you've been here before, even though you know you haven't. That's how I felt one afternoon as I walked down an unfamiliar street. I had been in the city for a while, but I didn't recognize this particular road, with its cracked sidewalks and faded storefronts. I had just finished a meeting and needed a bit of fresh air before heading home, so I decided to take a stroll. It wasn't the most scenic part of the city, but something about the quiet, the way the buildings seemed to close in on the street, made me feel oddly safe. The moment I stepped onto the street, it felt familiar, not in a way that I had walked here before, but in a strange, gut-deep sense of déjà vu. The air was thick with the scent of rain that hadn't quite fallen, the kind of humidity that lingers in the sky before a storm. The faint buzz of fluorescent lights from the small shops lining the street hummed in the background, and there was a soft, persistent rattle from an old bicycle leaning against the lamppost. It felt like time was suspended here, just waiting for something to happen. I walked for a while, lost in my thoughts, the sound of my shoes tapping against the pavement like a steady drumbeat. As I passed the third shop, an old bookstore with cracked windows and shelves of dust-covered novels, I felt it again. The same sense of familiarity. It wasn't just the street or the air, it was the feeling that I had done this before, walked this exact path, in this exact moment. I shook it off. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was just tired from the long day. But the more I walked, the stronger the sensation grew, until it wasn't just a passing feeling, it was a certainty. I had been here before. I glanced around, trying to make sense of it. The buildings, the signs, the bicycle that had been leaning against the lamppost, it all looked too real, too detailed to be imagined. It was as if the world had been frozen in place, waiting for me to recognize it. And then, I reached the end of the street. I stopped, a little out of breath, trying to shake the strange unease that had settled in my chest. There was nothing remarkable about the street corner ahead of me, just another intersection, with a few cars passing by and a bus pulling up to the stop. I turned around, ready to retrace my steps, but when I did, I froze. The street was the same. It looked exactly as it had when I first set foot on it. Same old bookstore, same bicycle against the lamppost, same dull hum of the fluorescent lights in the shop windows. My heart skipped a beat as I looked at the familiar scene, the feeling of déjà vu crawling up my spine once more. I hadn't walked far enough to end up back here. This wasn't the way I had come. I took a step back, my eyes darting around. The street was quiet, too quiet. The only sound was the distant hum of traffic, the soft shuffle of my shoes against the wet pavement. I looked at the buildings again. They hadn't changed. But I had the strangest sensation, like I was staring at them for the first time, seeing them clearly, as if they were holding some kind of secret I wasn't supposed to know. I turned again, this time determined to keep going. There was no way I could have ended up back here. I must have made a wrong turn, a mistake. I couldn't trust my memory, especially not now, when it felt like everything was slipping out of focus. But no matter how far I walked, no matter how many turns I made, I kept coming back to the same spot. Same corner. Same bicycle. Same bookstore with its dusty windows. I stopped, breathing heavily now, trying to steady my racing thoughts. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be. But I looked again, the same lamppost, the same bicycle. I even checked my watch. Only a few minutes had passed, but it felt like hours. I was losing track of time, losing track of everything. The street didn't feel real anymore. It felt like I had stepped into some kind of loop, a strange, invisible cycle that I couldn't break. I walked faster this time, my pace quickening as panic started to claw at the edges of my mind. What was happening? Why was I here again, walking in circles, retracing my own steps? The buildings around me seemed to loom taller, their shadows stretching longer, like they were closing in on me. I looked up again, and for a split second, I saw something that shouldn't have been there. A figure standing in the doorway of the bookstore. I couldn't make out the details, but I knew someone was watching me. I took a sharp breath, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't stay here. I had to get out. But as I moved forward, a strange thought crossed my mind. What if I was walking in the wrong direction? What if I was moving backwards, somehow, or had always been? I spun around, desperate to find a way out. But it was too late. I was already back at the same street corner. Same bookstore, same bicycle. Same street lamp flickering overhead. My mind reeled. My feet moved, almost on their own, retracing the same steps once more. I wasn't sure how much time had passed, minutes, hours, days, maybe, but every time I looked around, I found myself in the same place. I thought about calling someone, anyone, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I felt like if I spoke, the world around me might shatter, might reveal something darker, something deeper than I was ready to understand. I wanted to scream, to ask for help, but I couldn't. My voice felt caught in my throat, as if the street itself was swallowing my words, trapping them inside. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, I found myself standing still, staring at the same bicycle again. It was the same as it had always been. But this time, there was something different, something I couldn't explain. A slight shift in the air. A subtle change in the atmosphere. I don't know how long I stood there, but when I finally gathered the strength to look around, I found something that had never been there before. In the reflection of the bookstore window, I saw myself. Standing there. But it wasn't me, not the me I knew. The figure in the window was wearing a different coat, a different expression, and it was staring at me, just like I had been staring at it. And that's when I understood. I wasn't walking down the street anymore. I was walking in circles, and I had been all along. I was walking home, as I always did, taking the same route through the narrow alley behind the old townhouses. The rain had just let up, but the air still clung to me, damp and heavy. It was late, much later than I'd intended to be out, and the streetlights buzzed overhead, flickering sporadically as if tired from the weight of the evening. I wasn't in a rush, though. My mind wandered aimlessly, the kind of wandering that happens when you're too tired to think but too awake to sleep. I passed the old bookshop on the corner, its windows dim and cracked, the smell of aged paper seeping into the street like a faint whisper. It was a shop I'd always meant to visit but never had. There was something about the place that felt off to me, not dangerous, but strange. It was the same as it had always been. But this time, there was something different, something I couldn't explain. A slight shift in the air. A subtle change in the atmosphere. I don't know how long I stood there, but when I finally gathered the strength to look around, I found something that had never been there before. In the reflection of the bookstore window, I saw myself. Standing there. But it wasn't me, not the me I knew. The figure in the window was wearing a different coat, a different expression, and it was staring at me, just like I had been staring at it. And that's when I understood. I wasn't walking down the street anymore. I was walking in circles, and I had been all along. It looked like a place that held too many secrets between its pages, a place that didn't want to be disturbed. So I kept walking, as I always did, never quite looking too long at its door. I turned onto the quieter part of the alley, the cobblestone streets barely illuminated by the flickering streetlights. It wasn't much of a shortcut, but it felt familiar, comforting in a way that made me feel less alone, even when I was walking by myself in the dead of night. The silence was thick, broken only by the sound of my own footsteps, echoing off the walls of the old buildings. That's when I heard it. A voice. It was soft, so soft I almost missed it at first. But it was there, unmistakable. The kind of voice you'd expect to hear in a quiet room, in a moment of deep conversation. But this voice, it wasn't coming from anywhere. Not from a person, not from anywhere around me. It was as if the voice was coming from the air itself, surrounding me, echoing in my head. The sound was clear, sharp, yet utterly disembodied. "Don't go further." I froze. My heart skipped a beat, a sudden cold sweat breaking across the back of my neck. I didn't know what to do. My first instinct was to look around, to search the alley for someone, anyone, but there was no one. Not a soul. The alley was empty. It was the same as it had always been. But this time, there was something different, something I couldn't explain. A slight shift in the air. A subtle change in the atmosphere. I don't know how long I stood there, but when I finally gathered the strength to look around, I found something that had never been there before. In the reflection of the bookstore window, I saw myself. Standing there. But it wasn't me, not the me I knew. The figure in the window was wearing a different coat, a different expression, and it was staring at me, just like I had been staring at it. And that's when I understood. I wasn't walking down the street anymore. I was walking in circles, and I had been all along. Then the voice spoke again, this time closer, like it was right next to my ear. "Don't go further. You don't belong here." It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even warning. It was pleading. The words were soft, but there was an urgency in them that sent a shiver down my spine. I looked up, scanning the alley, desperate for any sign of where the voice might be coming from. But the street was empty, as it had always been. No one in sight. My breath caught in my throat. The air around me felt different now, like something had shifted, like the world had tilted on its axis just enough to unsettle everything. It felt like I was standing at the edge of something, a place where the normal rules of reality didn't apply. A place that wasn't meant to be. I stepped forward again, trying to ignore the unease gnawing at the pit of my stomach, trying to convince myself that I was just imagining things. But the voice didn't stop. It continued to come from nowhere, surrounding me, wrapping around me, like a cloud of invisible words. "You should turn back," it whispered now, the voice softer, like a breath in the wind. "It's not too late." I stopped walking again, this time more purposefully. I felt as though I had been led to this moment, to this point, and I didn't know whether to be frig. It was the same as it had always been. But this time, there was something different, something I couldn't explain. A slight shift in the air. A subtle change in the atmosphere. I don't know how long I stood there, but when I finally gathered the strength to look around, I found something that had never been there before. In the reflection of the bookstore window, I saw myself. Standing there. But it wasn't me, not the me I knew. The figure in the window was wearing a different coat, a different expression, and it was staring at me, just like I had been staring at it. And that's when I understood. I wasn't walking down the street anymore. I was walking in circles, and I had been all along. I wanted to leave, to run from whatever was happening, whatever was telling me not to move forward. But then something caught my eye. At the far end of the alley, just beyond where the light from the street lamp barely reached, there was a shadow. A shape. Something tall, something shifting. For a moment, I thought it was just a trick of the light, a shadow cast by one of the buildings. But it wasn't. It was a figure, standing motionless in the dark. I couldn't make out any details, no face, no features, just the outline of a person or something that looked like a person. I couldn't tear my gaze away from it. And then, through the silence of the alley, the voice spoke once more. But this time, it wasn't warning me. It wasn't trying to stop me. This time, it was desperate. "You have to leave now." The words hung in the air, trembling. I could feel the weight of them in my chest, like the air itself had thickened with the urgency of the voice. I could sense it, the shift in the atmosphere, the feeling that whatever was standing at the end of the alley was not something I should approach. It wasn't part of the world I knew. It was something else. But I couldn't stop myself. I took a step forward, my feet moving on their own, drawn toward the figure. The voice grew quiet. I didn't listen. The figure at the end of the alley was growing clearer now, its outline sharper, its presence more pronounced. I felt my heart racing, my pulse quickening as I took another step, then another, and with each step, the figure seemed to become more tangible, more real. But then something happened, something that made everything freeze. The shadow moved. It took a step toward me. But it wasn't walking. It glided. The movement was smooth, too smooth, unnatural. The air around me grew colder, and I felt the hairs on my neck stand on end. The voice had stopped, but I could still feel it, lingering like a cloud overhead, the weight of its silence pressing down on me. And that's when I realized, the figure wasn't just moving toward me. It was mimicking me. Every step I took forward, it took a step forward. Every time I hesitated, it mirrored my hesitation. It was copying my movements. I froze, caught in place, my breath trapped in my chest. I couldn't move, couldn't take my eyes off the figure that was copying me. And then, slowly, just as I thought I might scream, the figure tilted its head slightly, as if studying me. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the figure stopped. It stood still, its form frozen in the shadowy corner of the alley, watching me. I could feel it watching me. The voice, the one that had warned me, the one that had spoken from nowhere, returned. This time, it was almost resigned, as if it had given up. "Now you know," it said softly. "Now you know what you've walked into." I don't know how long I stood there, trapped in the silence of that alley, staring at the figure that mirrored my every movement. But eventually, I turned and walked away, the air heavy with the weight of the voice's final words. I couldn't explain what had just happened, what I had just seen. But I knew one thing for certain, I would never walk that alley again. And I would never forget the voice that came from nowhere, warning me of what I could not see. I had been passing by the old building for months before I finally decided to step inside. It wasn't a place I had ever given much thought to. It stood at the end of a narrow street, its faded brick walls and rusted ironwork blending into the backdrop of the city. It wasn't exactly abandoned, but it didn't seem like it had been lived in or used for anything in years. The windows were clouded with grime, and a heavy layer of dust coated everything in sight. Yet, there was something about it, something subtle, that pulled me toward it one rainy afternoon. The door creaked loudly as I pushed it open. The air inside was stale, heavy with the scent of old wood and forgotten memories. It felt like time had stopped here, suspended in a quiet, forgotten moment. The hallway stretched before me, dimly lit by an overhead light that flickered intermittently. The floors creaked beneath my feet as I stepped inside, the sound of my shoes muted by the thick carpet that had long lost its color. The walls were lined with faded wallpaper, curling at the edges like it was trying to escape the weight of the years. I don't know why I felt drawn to explore it. Maybe it was the emptiness, the stillness, or perhaps it was the feeling that something inside was waiting for me. I didn't think much about it at the time. I just started walking. The first door I came to was cracked slightly open. It wasn't locked, and it gave way with a gentle push, opening into a large, dimly lit room. The air inside was even colder, and the silence was thick, almost suffocating. I stepped in, surveying the room. It was furnished, an old wooden desk sat in the middle, piles of papers scattered across its surface. The chairs around it were mismatched, worn from years of use. On the walls hung paintings that I didn't recognize, their frames cracked, some tilted at strange angles. I walked further into the room, drawn to the large window at the far end. Outside, the city loomed, its sounds muffled by the old glass. The view should have been familiar, the same street, the same buildings I had passed hundreds of times before. But the longer I stood there, the more something about the scene bothered me. The street wasn't quite right. The buildings outside seemed slightly off, their shapes unfamiliar, as if I were looking at them through a foggy lens. This time, it was almost resigned, as if it had given up. "Now you know," it said softly. Now you know what you've walked into. I don't know how long I stood there, trapped in the silence of that alley, staring at the figure that mirrored my every movement. But eventually, I turned and walked away, the air heavy with the weight of the voice's final words. I couldn't explain what had just happened, what I had just seen. But I knew one thing for certain, I would never walk that alley again. And I would never forget the voice that came from nowhere, warning me of what I could not see. I blinked and rubbed my eyes, trying to focus, but when I looked back out the window, the view had returned to normal. I didn't think much of it at the time. Perhaps it was just the strange lighting, or maybe the window itself was warped from age. But as I turned to leave the room, something caught my attention. The hallway outside had changed. I stepped back out into the corridor, and instead of the familiar hallway I had entered, the walls now seemed slightly different. The colors of the wallpaper had shifted, they were darker now, more muted. The paintings on the walls had changed, too. Where there had been a single landscape painting, there were now several framed photographs, all of places I didn't recognize. The floor was now covered with a faded rug that hadn't been there before, and the faint smell of wood and dust had been replaced by something sharper, almost metallic. I shook my head, disoriented. It couldn't have changed. It was the same hallway I had entered, I was sure of it. But when I stepped forward, the sense of unfamiliarity grew stronger. The air felt colder, heavier, and the walls seemed to close in a little bit, as if the building was shrinking around me. I turned back toward the room I had just left, but the door was gone. It wasn't there anymore. I stood still for a moment, breathing in the heavy silence. Then, cautiously, I moved down the hallway, unsure of where I was headed. The next door I came to was completely different from the first. It was a heavy, dark wood, ornate in its carvings, with a brass handle that gleamed in the dim light. I reached for it, hesitated for a moment, and then pushed it open. Inside was a room unlike the first one. This one was smaller, more cramped, but it felt older, somehow. The furniture was sparse, just a small couch in the corner, a low table beside it. The wallpaper here was peeling, the edges curling away from the wall like it couldn't stand being part of the room any longer. There were no windows here, only a small, dim light overhead that flickered occasionally. I felt a strange sense of déjà vu as I stepped further into the room. It was as if I had seen it before, been in it before. I glanced around, trying to place the feeling, but nothing about the room seemed familiar. Still, I couldn't shake the sensation that I had somehow already experienced it. I moved to the far corner of the room, where a small wooden cabinet stood against the wall. I opened it, expecting it to be empty, but to my surprise, there were old books stacked inside. The books were worn, their pages yellowed with age, their covers cracked and faded. I pulled one out, brushing off the dust that clung to it. The title was in a language I didn't recognize, and the pages inside were filled with strange, indecipherable writing. I felt a chill as I flipped through them, an uncomfortable weight pressing on my chest. The room around me seemed to grow colder, darker. I could hear the soft sound of whispers, like distant voices, but when I turned to listen, they stopped. I couldn't shake the feeling that the room was changing again. It wasn't just the furniture, the decorations, or the wallpaper, it was everything. The air seemed thicker, like it was pressing against me, closing in tighter with every second. I turned toward the door, desperate to leave, but when I opened it, I found myself standing in the same hallway again. The hallway was unchanged, but the room I had just left had vanished. There was nothing behind that door now, just a blank wall. I could feel the panic rising in my chest as I stared at the smooth surface of the wall where a door had once been. My mind was racing. I had entered that room. I had seen it, with my own eyes, but now it was gone. I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know how to make sense of it. I stepped back, my heart pounding, and turned to find another door. This time, I didn't hesitate. I pushed it open. But it wasn't the same room, either. The room was now a hallway again, a hallway that seemed to stretch endlessly in both directions. The walls were lined with mirrors, their surfaces cloudy and cracked, distorting the reflection of the space around me. I caught a glimpse of myself in one of the mirrors, but the reflection didn't match my movements. It was as though I was 2 steps behind, my movements trailing just a fraction of a second after my body. My reflection inched closer to the edge of the mirror, staring back at me with a gaze that felt too intense, too knowing. I stumbled back, my breath shallow. The room felt like it was folding in on itself, the reflection stretching into infinity. The air grew even colder, the whispers returning, louder now, all around me, echoing from every mirror, until they blended together into an unintelligible murmur. I tried to leave, to find a way out, but the hallway seemed endless, the doors never leading to the same place. No matter which way I turned, no matter which door I opened, the rooms were different. The rooms had never been the same, and I was trapped in a building that didn't follow the rules of space, a place that changed with every glance, every step I took. And no matter how much I wanted to escape, no matter how desperately I tried, I couldn't leave. The rooms kept shifting, the walls kept changing, and I kept walking, deeper into the heart of the building that wasn't quite a building at all. It was something else entirely. It started on an ordinary afternoon, the kind where the light seemed just a bit too soft and the world felt a little too quiet. I had spent the day cleaning out my apartment, something I didn't do often enough, but the kind of chore that always seemed necessary when the clutter started to feel suffocating. I was sorting through boxes and old bags, organizing the piles of forgotten things, when I came across it, the object that would send everything spiraling. It was a small, silver key, worn from age but still perfectly smooth to the touch. I didn't recognize it. I could have sworn I had never seen it before. It was just a simple key, nothing extraordinary, but there was something about it that felt out of place. I held it in my hand for a moment, turning it over, trying to remember if I had ever seen it before, but nothing came to mind. I shrugged it off, thinking it was something I had picked up over the years and forgotten about. I placed it on my desk, just for the moment, intending to figure out where it came from later. The rest of the evening passed in a haze, my thoughts distracted by the task of cleaning and organizing. But every time I walked past the desk, my eyes would flicker to the key, and I felt this strange, nagging sense of unease. It wasn't that I was scared, I was just unsettled. I couldn't place why. The next morning, I found the key again. But it wasn't on my desk. It was on the kitchen counter. I stared at it for a long moment, my mind scrambling to make sense of what I was seeing. There it was, that same silver key, sitting in the exact spot where I had just placed it the night before. I hadn't moved it. I hadn't touched it since I put it on my desk. My stomach turned slightly as I picked it up, turning it over in my hand, just as I had done the day before. It was still the same key, still unfamiliar, still with that strange feeling of wrongness. I checked the apartment, thinking that perhaps someone had been in here, a friend, a roommate, though I had none. Maybe someone had dropped by and moved it. But there was no one. No sign of anyone having entered. The apartment was exactly as I had left it, save for the key on the counter. I didn't know why, but I took the key with me when I went to work. It felt wrong to leave it there, alone in the apartment, as though it was waiting for something. Waiting for me to do something about it. I slipped it into my pocket and tried to go about my day, but the whole time, my thoughts kept returning to that key. It felt like it was watching me. Like it was somehow a part of something bigger than I could understand. That evening, after work, I returned to my apartment. As I walked in, something caught my eye. The key. It was on the living room table now. My heart skipped a beat. I froze in the doorway, my eyes locked on it. There it was, sitting there, exactly where I had last seen it, and yet, I had never placed it there. I hadn't touched it since the morning. I knew I hadn't. I walked over slowly, my hands trembling slightly as I picked it up. The cold metal felt heavier this time, somehow, like it had accumulated weight in my pocket, waiting for me to notice. I turned it over and over again in my hands, my thoughts swirling. How was it possible? There was no way anyone else could have come into my apartment. I lived alone, and I made sure to lock the door when I left. I hadn't even heard the faintest sound of a key turning in a lock, no footsteps in the hall, no whispers at the door. The key didn't belong to me. But it was in my apartment, in places I had just been. I set it down on the table and stepped back. I needed to think. I needed to get some clarity. But as I walked away, something caught my attention. The reflection in the window, the key was still there, but in the reflection, it was not. I turned quickly, my heart now racing. I looked at the table. The key was still sitting there, exactly where I had left it. But the reflection in the window, the key was gone. I felt a cold wave of panic rush over me. I turned to look back at the table again, but it was still there. I blinked rapidly, trying to process what was happening. Had I imagined it? Had my mind been playing tricks on me? I reached for it again, my hand shaking as I grasped the cold metal, now colder than before. And then, in that brief moment of uncertainty, I felt something shift inside me. The key didn't feel right. It wasn't just unfamiliar. It wasn't just out of place. It was wrong. The weight of it in my hand felt strange, as though it didn't belong to me, like it was waiting to be claimed by someone else, someone who would know exactly what it was for. But there was no one else. There was just me, and this key, and the growing sense that it was tied to something far beyond my understanding. I looked around, my mind spinning. I checked the hallway, the door, even the small closet in the corner. There was nothing else strange in the apartment, nothing that would explain the key's presence. No notes, no messages, no clues. Just the same key, moving from one place to the next, as though it was guiding me to something. But what? The next morning, I woke to find the key gone again. I had placed it on the table, just before I went to bed, and yet when I stepped into the living room, it was nowhere to be found. I searched everywhere, tearing the place apart, under the couch, in the kitchen drawers, even in the bathroom. Nothing. I thought about leaving, about getting out of the apartment, about forgetting the whole thing, but something held me back. The key had become more than just an object. It had become a puzzle, one that I couldn't solve, no matter how much I tried. I was obsessed with it. I needed to understand why it kept moving, why it kept appearing in different places, and why it felt like it was drawing me closer to something I couldn't see. I went to work that day, trying to clear my mind, but when I returned, there it was. On my bed. The key. And this time, I was certain, it didn't belong to me. I had just finished a long day at work, the kind of day that drags on with every tick of the clock, and as the evening sun dipped below the horizon, I was eager to head home. The office building I worked in was a tall, modern structure, with sleek glass windows and polished floors that echoed with the hum of fluorescent lights. As I stepped out of the elevator on the ground floor, I saw her. She was standing by the elevator, a young woman, dressed in a simple gray coat with a scarf draped loosely around her neck. Her dark hair was tied back into a neat ponytail, and she seemed preoccupied, glancing at her phone as if she were waiting for someone. There was something strangely familiar about her, though I couldn't place it. She wasn't anyone I recognized from the office, but something about her presence made me pause for a moment. I stepped toward the door, glancing back one last time as the elevator doors opened behind her. She glanced up, and I noticed her smile. It was small, polite, but something about it sent a ripple of unease through me. I shook off the feeling, telling myself it was nothing, just a coincidence. After all, it had been a long day. I stepped outside into the cool evening air and started walking to my car, the streets bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. I went to work that day, trying to clear my mind, but when I returned, there it was. On my bed. The key. And this time, I was certain, it didn't belong to me. I had just finished a long day at work, the kind of day that drags on with every tick of the clock, and as the evening sun dipped below the horizon, I was eager to head home. The office building I worked in was a tall, modern structure, with sleek glass windows and polished floors that echoed with the hum of fluorescent lights. As I stepped out of the elevator on the ground floor, I saw her. She was standing by the elevator, a young woman, dressed in a simple gray coat with a scarf draped loosely around her neck. Her dark hair was tied back into a neat ponytail, and she seemed preoccupied, glancing at her phone as if she were waiting for someone. There was something strangely familiar about her, though I couldn't place it. She wasn't anyone I recognized from the office, but something about her presence made me pause for a moment. I stepped toward the door, glancing back one last time as the elevator doors opened behind her. She glanced up, and I noticed her smile. It was small, polite, but something about it sent a ripple of unease through me. I shook off the feeling, telling myself it was nothing, just a coincidence. After all, it had been a long day. I stepped outside into the cool evening air and started walking to my car, the streets bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. This time, it was almost resigned, as if it had given up. "Now you know," it said softly. "Now you know what you've walked into." I don't know how long I stood there, trapped in the silence of that alley, staring at the figure that mirrored my every movement. But eventually, I turned and walked away, the air heavy with the weight of the voice's final words. I couldn't explain what had just happened, what I had just seen. But I knew one thing for certain, I would never walk that alley again. And I would never forget the voice that came from nowhere, warning me of what I could not see. For a split second, I wondered if the elevator was stuck, but then I noticed the woman. She was no longer looking at her phone. She was staring directly ahead, her expression completely blank, almost as if she were in some kind of trance. Her eyes didn't move, didn't blink. She stood frozen, not even acknowledging the sudden halt. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I stared at her. And then, the elevator moved again, jolting forward. The familiar sound of its machinery returned as it continued its ascent, but the moment had left an unsettling feeling lingering in the air. The elevator stopped on the 8th floor, which wasn't mine, but I hadn't thought much of it. She stepped out of the elevator without a word. I watched her go, her footsteps echoing down the empty hallway as the doors closed behind her. I didn't think much of it at first. It was a quiet morning, and the 8th floor wasn't one I often went to. But as I made my way to my office on the 14th floor, I felt that same sense of unease creeping in. It wasn't until a little later, when I was sitting at my desk, that I realized something odd. The 8th floor wasn't where she was supposed to be. The woman wasn't supposed to be there. I knew the building's layout well enough to recognize that she hadn't pressed a button for the 8th floor. She hadn't even moved. She had just stepped out. As if she had been following some invisible direction. Curiosity gnawed at me throughout the day. I couldn't shake the image of her face, of her blank expression. Had she been confused? Had she made a mistake? I didn't know. But something about it didn't sit right. It was as though she had walked into that elevator knowing something I didn't, like the elevator had taken her somewhere she wasn't meant to be. The next day, I arrived at work, trying to put the strange encounter behind me. But as I stepped into the building and walked past the security desk, I saw her again. She was standing in the lobby, near the elevators, just as she had been before. She didn't seem to notice me this time either. She was staring at the doors, like she was waiting for something, her face expressionless. I couldn't help it. I walked over to her, feeling a strange impulse pull me closer. "Excuse me," I said softly, hesitating for a moment before continuing. Are you okay?" She blinked, as if she hadn't noticed me before. Her smile returned, that small, polite smile, but this time, there was something darker behind it. Something empty. "I'm fine," she replied, her voice calm and measured, though it didn't quite match the emptiness in her eyes. The elevator doors opened behind her. I stared at her for a moment longer, unsure of what to say, when she stepped forward and entered the elevator without a second glance at me. I thought the drive would give me clarity, some space to breathe, to think. But instead, it only left me more unsettled. The road stretched endlessly before me, winding through dense forests and rolling hills, with no clear direction or destination. I was following the GPS, but it felt as though I were drifting without any real purpose. The more I drove, the more it felt like I was heading into the unknown, a place where the world didn't make sense anymore. And then I saw it. The road split in two, right in the middle of nowhere. One path veered off to the left, winding up into a foggy hill, its destination hidden by the mist. The other stretched straight ahead, disappearing into a dense thicket of trees, dark and foreboding. It wasn't marked with signs, no warning or direction. Just two choices, each as mysterious and uncertain as the other. I paused for a moment, my hand resting on the steering wheel. The rain had started to fall harder now, the droplets slapping against the roof of the car. I wasn't sure why, but I felt an odd sense of pressure, like I was supposed to make a decision, as if something in the air was waiting for me to choose. I glanced at the GPS. No help. It was just a blank screen, the little blue dot showing me lost, disconnected from the world. The road in front of me was empty, no other cars in sight. The world felt quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that wraps around you and makes you feel like you're the only one who exists. I chose the road on the left. I told myself it was the right choice. After all, I had no idea where either path would lead, but something about the fog in the distance called to me. It seemed inviting, promising something beyond the uncertainty. Maybe it was the allure of the unknown, or maybe I just wanted to be anywhere other than where I was. I turned the wheel and drove up the misty path. The fog thickened as I climbed, obscuring everything around me. It was like the world had shrunk to the size of my car, and I was completely isolated, alone in this narrow stretch of road. The trees on either side towered above me, their branches twisted and gnarled, stretching like skeletal arms into the gray sky. The only sounds were the steady rhythm of the rain against my windshield and the occasional crack of thunder in the distance. I drove for what felt like hours, but I never saw anything that resembled a landmark, a sign, or a sign of life. The fog never lifted. It just swirled around me, wrapping tighter and tighter, until I felt like I was driving through a dream, one that I couldn't wake up from. After what seemed like an eternity, I reached another fork in the road. This one, though, was different. The two paths ahead of me didn't just split in the usual way, they seemed to stretch into two separate realities. One road seemed brighter, though still shrouded in mist, while the other was darker, almost black, as though it led into a place untouched by light. I hesitated, my foot hovering over the brake. The choices were even more confusing now. I had been driving for so long, and yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was going in circles. Nothing had changed. Nothing had moved. The landscape, the trees, the fog, it was all the same. I chose the darker path. It was a decision I couldn't explain, just one that felt necessary, like I was drawn to it, unable to resist. As I drove down the darker path, the rain intensified. My headlights barely cut through the thick fog. It was like driving through a tunnel, and for the first time, a sense of dread crawled up my spine. I felt something in the air, a presence, a heaviness that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I wasn't alone. The road twisted and turned, and the trees seemed to close in, their branches scraping against the sides of the car. Every now and then, the headlights would catch a glimpse of something, a shadow darting just outside the reach of the light, or the briefest flash of something watching from the woods. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter, but no matter how fast I drove, I never felt like I was escaping it. It was like something was following me, something just out of sight, just beyond the edge of my awareness. I don't know how long I drove like that. Time seemed to lose all meaning. The only thing that mattered was the road, and the feeling that I was never truly moving forward. And then, suddenly, I found myself back where I had started. The road had opened up into a familiar stretch of highway. The fog had lifted, and the rain had stopped. It was as if nothing had changed at all. I looked around, my pulse quickening. I recognized the street sign ahead, the same one I had passed at the very beginning of my drive, before I'd come across the fork in the road. It couldn't be. How was this possible? I stopped the car, my heart pounding in my chest. I had driven for hours, or maybe days, and yet here I was, back at the very place I had started. The same stretch of road, the same sign. The world around me felt surreal, as if I had never left, as if I had been caught in some strange loop. I took a deep breath, trying to make sense of it, but the more I thought, the less clear things became. The road had split in two, yes, but now it felt like the choices I made didn't matter. No matter which path I took, I ended up right back here, in this place where nothing made sense. I started the car again, deciding to try another route, but before I could move, I saw it, a figure standing at the edge of the road, watching me from the trees. I couldn't see their face, just the outline of their body, but I knew they were there. And in that moment, I understood. It wasn't the road that had split. It was me. The road wasn't the one that led me back to where I started. It was something inside me. Some choice I had made. And then, suddenly, I found myself back where I had started. The road had opened up into a familiar stretch of highway. The fog had lifted, and the rain had stopped. It was as if nothing had changed at all. I looked around, my pulse quickening. I recognized the street sign ahead, the same one I had passed at the very beginning of my drive, before I'd come across the fork in the road. It couldn't be. How was this possible? I stopped the car, my heart pounding in my chest. I had driven for hours, or maybe days, and yet here I was, back at the very place I had started. The same stretch of road, the same sign. The world around me felt surreal, as if I had never left, as if I had been caught in some strange loop. I took a deep breath, trying to make sense of it, but the more I thought, the less clear things became. The road had split in two, yes, but now it felt like the choices I made didn't matter. No matter which path I took, I ended up right back here, in this place where nothing made sense. I started the car again, deciding to try another route, but before I could move, I saw it, a figure standing at the edge of the road, watching me from the trees. I couldn't see their face, just the outline of their body, but I knew they were there. And in that moment, I understood. It wasn't the road that had split. It was me. The road wasn't the one that led me back to where I started. It was something inside me. Some choice I had made. So instead, I stayed quiet, listening to the soft hum of the lights and the gentle tapping of rain against the window. Curiosity got the better of me, and I gently touched the chair back. It was warm. Not from the cafe's temperature, but from body heat. Someone had been sitting there not long ago. Maybe even seconds before I entered. A subtle shift passed through the room then, something so faint it could have been my imagination. The lights seemed to flicker, not visibly but in the way their glow felt, like the atmosphere thickened for just a moment. The room seemed to breathe, silently, as though acknowledging my presence. I backed away from the table slowly, feeling suddenly like an intruder in someone else's moment. The coffee remained still, steam curling upward in that soft, persistent drift. My eyes moved again to the notebook. A few words on the page I hadn't noticed before seemed darker, bolder, as if written more recently than the rest. My heart thudded lightly as I leaned in to read them. They always come back eventually. I straightened up, a prickling sensation crawling slowly across my arms. The words felt directed, though I knew that couldn't be right. They were just ink on paper, written by someone I'd never met. And yet, the phrasing made something inside me shift uneasily. I turned toward the counter, planning to check the back room, but I stopped when I heard the bell above the front door. Not chiming. Just gently swaying. As if it had been moved. But I hadn't touched the door after entering. The air felt slightly colder now, just a breath of coolness threading through the warm room. The shadows in the corners felt heavier, stretched just a bit longer, like they were leaning toward me. I took a slow step backward. Then another. The cafe didn't feel empty anymore. It felt aware. Watching. But still silent. I felt the urge to leave building in my chest, not panic, but a steady, quiet insistence, like someone nudging me gently toward the exit. I backed up toward the door, not wanting to turn my back on the room until the very last moment. The bell above the door swayed again, lightly, just once. When I finally stepped out into the rain, the cool air soaked instantly into the unease I'd been carrying. The street felt normal again, dim lights, wet pavement, the quiet whisper of rainfall. But when I turned back to look through the cafe window, my breath caught in my throat. The cup of coffee was gone. The notebook was closed. And the chair was pushed neatly under the table. As if no one had been there at all. I took a few cautious steps away, my heart beating in a slow, heavy rhythm. The warm glow from the cafe looked softer now, almost blurred behind the window's sheen. I walked for several minutes before I realized something that made the hair on the back of my neck lift slowly, like a cold finger trailing down my spine. I could still smell coffee on my clothes. Strong. Warm. Fresh. As if I had been sitting inside that cafe for a long time. As if the scent had settled into my coat from hours, not minutes, of being there. When I reached my apartment later that night, I set my keys down and paused, struck by an odd sensation, like the faint warmth of a cup lingering in my palms, even though I hadn't touched anything in that cafe. I told myself not to overthink it. Just a strange moment on a rainy night. Nothing more. But sometimes, when the weather is quiet and the air smells like damp pavement, I get the urge to walk down that street again. I never see the cafe. Not its lights, not its sign, not even its doorway. And yet, occasionally, for just a split second, I'll catch the faint aroma of warm coffee drifting through the air, rich and inviting. Like a memory. Or an invitation. Or something waiting for me to return. Here is a full-length, immersive, slow-paced horror story in a calm, bedtime-friendly tone. No jump scares, no gore, only atmosphere, psychological tension, and subtle dread. Written entirely in paragraph format. I still remember the night I found my phone on the kitchen counter, even though I was certain I'd lost it earlier that day. It had slipped out of my pocket on the bus, at least that's what I believed. I spent nearly an hour retracing my steps through the city in a gentle, unhurried rain, listening to the soft hiss of tires on wet pavement and the muted drumming of raindrops on my umbrella. As if I had been sitting inside that cafe for a long time. As if the scent had settled into my coat from hours, not minutes, of being there. When I reached my apartment later that night, I set my keys down and paused, struck by an odd sensation, like the faint warmth of a cup lingering in my palms, even though I hadn't touched anything in that cafe. I told myself not to overthink it. Just a strange moment on a rainy night. Nothing more. But sometimes, when the weather is quiet and the air smells like damp pavement, I get the urge to walk down that street again. I never see the cafe. Not its lights, not its sign, not even its doorway. And yet, occasionally, for just a split second, I'll catch the faint aroma of warm coffee drifting through the air, rich and inviting. Like a memory. Or an invitation. Or something waiting for me to return. Here is a full-length, immersive, slow-paced horror story in a calm, bedtime-friendly tone. No jump scares, no gore, only atmosphere, psychological tension, and subtle dread. Written entirely in paragraph format. I still remember the night I found my phone on the kitchen counter, even though I was certain I'd lost it earlier that day. It had slipped out of my pocket on the bus, at least that's what I believed. I spent nearly an hour retracing my steps through the city in a gentle, unhurried rain, listening to the soft hiss of tires on wet pavement and the muted drumming of raindrops on my umbrella. By the time I reached home, my clothes were damp, my hands cold, and my thoughts drifting and unfocused. I had accepted the loss. Yet when I turned on the light and stepped into the kitchen, the phone was sitting there on the counter, screen glowing faintly as if it had been waiting for me. The first thing that unsettled me was how dry it was. Not a single drop of rain, no smudge on the screen, no sign it had been outside. It looked exactly as it had when I last held it that morning. I stood there for a long moment, my breath soft in the quiet kitchen, listening to the distant, steady patter of rain against the window. Something felt off, but in a subtle, delicate way, like I had walked into a conversation that had started without me. When I finally picked up the phone, the screen unlocked immediately. Notifications lined the top, 3 messages from an unknown number. All received within the last hour. The timestamps caught my eye instantly, they were marked for the next day. Not hours ahead. An entire day ahead. I stared at them, feeling a cold, spreading unease at the base of my spine. At first I thought it was just a glitch, a wrong date setting, something simple and technical. But the rest of the phone's time matched the clock on my microwave perfectly. Everything else was correct. Only those messages didn't belong to the present. The preview of the first message was unsettlingly simple: "Don't go outside tonight." My throat tightened. I opened it slowly, the quiet of the apartment growing heavier as if the air itself leaned closer to listen. The message was longer than the preview suggested, written in a calm, unhurried tone, as if from someone who knew me well. "You'll hear something around midnight," it said. "Stay away from the door. No matter what." I read it twice, my heart beating steadily but heavily, each pulse echoing faintly in my chest. I checked the number again, unrecognizable. No name, no picture, no history. Just those words sent from tomorrow. I moved to the second message with hesitant fingers, feeling the quiet around me deepen. The room seemed dimmer somehow, even though the lights were still on. It read, "You'll want to check the peephole. Don't. Promise me you won't." A soft chill rippled across my skin. Rain tapped gently against the window, slow and rhythmic, like a quiet reminder that time was still moving normally outside even if it felt suspended inside my apartment. By the time I opened the third message, I was breathing carefully, trying to steady the growing sense of unease spreading through me. The message was shorter than the others, but something about it felt heavier, colder. "You'll hear your name. It won't be me." I stood there motionless, the glow of the phone lighting my fingertips. A feeling I can only describe as quiet dread seeped into me, not sharp or sudden, but slow and steady like a shadow stretching across a floor. I set the phone down gently, as though afraid I might disturb whatever fragile barrier existed between me and whatever the messages were warning me about. The house felt different now, the familiar shapes of furniture suddenly strange, the corners of the room darker, the hum of the refrigerator oddly distant. The rain outside felt louder than before, as if it had moved closer to the windows. I walked into the living room, each step precise and careful. I sat down on the couch and stared at the clock on the wall. It wasn't even 10 p.m., midnight felt like an eternity away. I tried to reason with myself, a prank, a bug, someone messing with me. But there was one detail I couldn't ignore: my phone hadn't been here when I left the apartment earlier. I had checked every surface before running out the door. I had searched my pockets multiple times. I remembered the small moment of frustration on the bus when I reached for it and felt nothing but fabric. It wasn't here then. But it was here now. And it had messages from the future. I tried to distract myself, made tea, tidied the living room, even turned on the TV. But everything felt muted, hollow, like the world was covered with a thin layer of fog. Around 11 p.m., I felt the tension settle deeper into my chest, a quiet heaviness that made me feel more aware of the silence inside the apartment. The rain had softened outside, turning into a faint drizzle that barely tapped against the window. Time passed slowly, each minute stretching, pulling thin. I kept glancing toward the door even though I didn't want to. Just before midnight, the lights flickered, only for a moment, and the air in the apartment grew colder. Not drastically, just enough for me to notice the change on my skin. The moment the clock clicked to 12 o'clock, the apartment fell into an uncanny stillness. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. And then I heard it. A soft sound at the door. Not knocking. Not scratching. Just movement. Something shifting gently against the wood, as though brushing against it. I felt my heart thump once, hard. The messages echoed through my mind. Stay away from the door. No matter what. Then came the second sound, a low, almost hesitant whisper. So faint I wasn't sure it was real. The sound of someone breathing on the other side of the door. I froze, staring straight ahead, afraid that even a small movement would betray me. The breathing was slow, shallow, and unnervingly familiar, though I couldn't place why. The air felt heavier with each passing second, the cold creeping deeper into the room. Then, as the messages had warned, I heard my name. Whispered quietly. Softly. Almost pleadingly. But it didn't sound right. It wasn't the tone anyone familiar to me would use. There was something off in the cadence, too slow, as if spoken by someone unused to forming the words. I remembered the final message. You'll hear your name. It won't be me. The whisper came again, slightly louder, the syllables stretching, bending in a way that made my skin tighten. I sat perfectly still, gripping the edge of the couch, feeling my pulse at the base of my neck. A faint shadow passed under the door, slow, dragging slightly, as if something shifted its weight from one foot to the other. Then the breathing stopped. Silence pooled into the room, thick and absolute. A long, tense moment passed. The air seemed to hold its breath with me. Then, without warning, the shadow under the door vanished, drawn away in a slow, drifting motion that felt almost deliberate. After another minute, the faint hum of the refrigerator returned, and the temperature in the room rose just a little. The world eased back into itself, slow and cautious, like a held breath being released. I didn't move until nearly half an hour later. When I finally found the courage to walk to the door, my hands trembled slightly. I leaned in, slowly, carefully, but didn't look through the peephole. I couldn't. Even approaching the door felt like pushing against some invisible resistance. I listened. There was nothing. No whisper. No breathing. Just the soft drip of rain from the roof. When morning finally came, the night felt like a distant, distorted memory. The sunlight made everything seem normal again, familiar, safe. But when I walked back into the kitchen, I saw my phone where I had left it. A new message notification glowed softly on the screen, waiting for me. The timestamp was tomorrow. Again. And the message was simple. Don't look outside tonight. Not when the rain stops. That was the moment I realized something wasn't warning me. Something was preparing me. Or, reminding me of something I had already lived once before. I don't know why that evening still lingers in my mind the way it does, like a soft mist that refuses to lift no matter how many times I try to explain it away. It began simply enough, on one of those quiet, rain-heavy nights when the air feels softer, as if sound itself is being absorbed by the dampness. I remember feeling strangely peaceful as I walked home along the long stretch of road that led from the old library back toward my apartment. The street wasn't well lit, but the glow of the street lamps shimmered through the falling rain, turning everything into blurred circles of gold. I usually liked that walk. It felt familiar, predictable. But that night, something about the atmosphere felt muted, as though the world itself was holding its breath. I first saw her when I turned the corner near the abandoned hardware store, the one that closed years ago but still had its sign hanging crookedly, swaying faintly even when there was no wind. She stood under the small plastic shelter at the bus stop. The next evening, I took the same route home. It was raining again, persistent, steady, and the streets were quieter than usual. And there she was. Same bus stop. Same posture. Same pale coat. Same unopened umbrella. For a brief moment, I felt as if the entire night had folded over itself, putting me back into the exact moment I'd left behind 24 hours earlier. I even told myself I might simply be mistaken, maybe confusing her with someone else. But the way she held the pole of the sign, the tilt of her head, the faint slump of her shoulders, it was all identical, too precise to be coincidence. I walked a little slower this time. She didn't look at me. But I noticed something I hadn't before: the shelter's bench was dry. Completely dry. The kind of dryness that made no sense when the rain had been pouring uninterrupted since afternoon. No drops clung to the roof of the shelter either. They fell all around it, but not inside it. And she stood as though she didn't notice. Again, there hadn't been a bus on that route at that hour for years. The third night, I told myself not to look, even though part of me already feared I knew what I'd see. The rain had eased to a soft drizzle, but the air felt heavier than ever. The street lamps hummed faintly, flickering once in a while as if trying to warn me of something. My steps slowed automatically as I approached the bus stop. She was there. But this time, she was facing me. Not fully, her body remained angled toward the road, but her head was turned in my direction, her chin dipped just enough that her eyes appeared shadowed. I couldn't read her expression. I don't know if it was because of the dim light or the way her hair clung to her cheeks, but it felt like she was watching me through some invisible film, something I couldn't cross. I didn't speak. I didn't dare. I simply walked past, pretending that nothing about this was unusual. My heartbeat felt strangely slow, almost too slow, like it was syncing itself to the rhythm of the falling rain. When I finally gained the courage to look back, she was no longer facing me. She had returned to her silent vigil, staring down the empty road. That night, I dreamed of a bus pulling up in complete silence, doors opening with no sound, headlights dimmed like dying candles. She boarded it without hesitation. And I woke with the feeling that I had witnessed something I wasn't meant to see. I tried taking a different route home the next day, but the rain was heavier than ever, and the other streets were flooded. I had no choice but to pass the bus stop again. I didn't want to, but something, curiosity or dread, I still don't know, pulled me back toward it. She was there, but something had changed. Her posture was different, she looked more rigid, as though the cold had seeped deep into her bones. But this time, she was facing me. Not fully, her body remained angled toward the road, but her head was turned in my direction, her chin dipped just enough that her eyes appeared shadowed. I couldn't read her expression. I don't know if it was because of the dim light or the way her hair clung to her cheeks, but it felt like she was watching me through some invisible film, something I couldn't cross. I didn't speak. I didn't dare. I simply walked past, pretending that nothing about this was unusual. My heartbeat felt strangely slow, almost too slow, like it was syncing itself to the rhythm of the falling rain. When I finally gained the courage to look back, she was no longer facing me. She had returned to her silent vigil, staring down the empty road. That night, I dreamed of a bus pulling up in complete silence, doors opening with no sound, headlights dimmed like dying candles. She boarded it without hesitation. And I woke with the feeling that I had witnessed something I wasn't meant to see. I tried taking a different route home the next day, but the rain was heavier than ever, and the other streets were flooded. I had no choice but to pass the bus stop again. I didn't want to, but something, curiosity or dread, I still don't know, pulled me back toward it. She was there, but something had changed. Her posture was different, she looked more rigid, as though the cold had seeped deep into her bones. Her hair was no longer wet, even though it was raining hard. Her coat looked too clean, untouched by mud or water stains. And the road around her felt unnaturally quiet, the kind of quiet that settles inside your ears rather than around you. As I approached, I realized there were footprints leading to the bus stop, wet footprints made by someone running through the rain. They led right to her feet. But there were no footprints leaving. And they were too large to be hers. Too heavy. Too hurried. I felt a faint pressure on the air, a shift in the atmosphere that made me slow down. The rain around the bus stop seemed quieter than the rain everywhere else. Almost as if something was absorbing the sound. For the first time, she lifted her umbrella slightly, not enough to open it, but enough to reveal that inside, printed in faint letters along the inner lining, was a bus schedule. A schedule I recognized, because it was the one they discontinued after the accident. The accident that killed the last passengers waiting for the final bus of the night. People said the bus never arrived. But the official report said otherwise. It arrived at the stop, picked up everyone waiting, and crashed just a few miles up the road. But witnesses claimed the bus stop was empty. That no one had been waiting. That they saw nothing. She lowered the umbrella again, gently, as though she had shown me something intimate. For a moment, I could swear the sign above her, the one displaying the route number, flickered with a dim, ghostly glow, showing a number I hadn't seen since childhood. The number of the route that was supposed to have ended forever after the crash. Even after rain blurred the edges of the sign, the number lingered just long enough for me to feel an awful certainty settling in my chest. She wasn't waiting for a bus that would never come. She was waiting for a bus that had already come once. I kept walking, driven by an instinct I can't name, an instinct that whispered not to stop, not to ask, not to stand near her for too long. And yet, when I turned the corner, something made me look back one last time. She wasn't alone. A second figure stood beside her now, tall, indistinct, its shape wavering slightly as if the rain passed through it differently than it passed through her. It was turned toward me, though I couldn't see its face. It held a damp bus ticket between two fingers, the paper sagging and translucent with moisture. It lifted the ticket slightly, as if offering it to me. And then the street lamp flickered again. In that split second of dimness, they both vanished. The bus stop was empty, rain filling the shelter once more, soaking the bench, dripping from the roof as it should have all along. The footprints were gone, erased completely as if no one had ever been there. But as I turned away, I heard the soft sound of an arriving bus, quiet, impossibly quiet, coming from a road that no longer exists on any map. The faint glow of headlights brushed the edge of the street, then faded like breath on glass. I haven't taken that road home since. I tell myself there are other shortcuts, safer ones, even if they take longer. But sometimes, late at night when the rain is heavy and the world is hushed, I still hear it, the gentle hiss of doors opening, the soft murmur of someone stepping inside, the distant sound of a bus pulling away toward nowhere. And once, just once, when I woke before dawn, I found a soaked bus ticket on my windowsill, printed with tomorrow's date. I didn't touch it. But it's still there. Waiting. I don't think I'll ever forget the quiet wait of that morning. It was one of those gray, early hours when the sky is still deciding whether it wants to be day at all. The rain had been falling since before dawn, a steady, muffled pattering that softened every sound and made the world feel smaller, enclosed almost. I remember waking up earlier than usual, a nagging restlessness deep in my chest that felt like I had forgotten something important. My apartment was cold, with that faint scent of old wood and dampness that creeps in on rainy days. I made coffee out of habit, though it tasted weaker than usual, as if even the water wasn't fully awake. I don't normally read the newspaper, but that day there was one lying outside my door, folded neatly, dry despite the rain, as though someone had placed it there moments before I opened the door. I picked it up without thinking, holding it under my arm as I carried my coffee to the table. Something about the weight of the newspaper felt wrong, like the pages were too heavy or too stiff. When I finally sat down and opened it, everything seemed ordinary at first. The smell of ink, the soft rustle of the pages, the faint warmth of the mug in my hands. But then my eyes fell on the headline. It was bold, large, impossible to miss. But I couldn't process it at first. It felt like reading something in a dream, familiar words arranged in a way that didn't make sense. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, looked again. And the headline had changed. Not drastically. Not dramatically. Just, different. The same number of words, the same placement, but a new sentence entirely. My heart gave a slow, uneasy thump in my chest. I stared at the letters, trying to make them stay still. I blinked again. The headline changed again. The feeling that swept through me wasn't fear, not immediately. It was confusion. A slow ripple of unease, like realizing the floor beneath you isn't as solid as you thought. I leaned closer, watching the ink with a strange fascination. The letters looked normal, crisp, dark, printed like any newspaper, but the words rearranged themselves silently every time my eyes closed. Blink. Another headline. Blink. And another. None of them made sense together. Some seemed mundane, weather warnings, local events. Others felt more ominous, cryptic phrases, incomplete sentences, dates that didn't align with anything. One mentioned a missing person I'd never heard of. Another mentioned something that hadn't happened, as far as I knew. Each headline felt like a shard of glass from a window I didn't recognize, reflecting a world slightly off from mine. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I was tired. Maybe the print was smudged or my vision was blurry. So I closed my eyes for a long moment, counted slowly to 5, and opened them. The headline was gone entirely. The top of the page was blank. The rest of the page, filled with smaller text, remained the same. But the space where the headline should have been was empty, a clean white void staring back at me. My stomach tightened. I felt small suddenly, as if the room around me had stretched in some subtle way, creating more distance between me and the furniture. I turned the page quickly, needing to break the moment. The next page was filled with columns of text, but as soon as I blinked, the text shifted. Not violently, not glitching, but gently, like sand sliding under water. I watched the letters rearrange themselves into new paragraphs. The words didn't swirl or melt, they simply rewrote themselves when I wasn't looking. A phrase appeared near the center of the page that made a cold prickle rise slowly across my arms. Keep watching. I blinked, and it was gone. Another line appeared somewhere else. Do not look away. Gone again. I closed the newspaper quickly, pressing my palm flat against the cover as if that could stop whatever was happening to the ink. The room felt different now, still quiet, still washed in the faint gray light of morning, but heavier somehow, like the walls were listening. The rain outside had softened to a thin whisper, barely audible anymore, and that made the silence inside more pronounced. I didn't open the newspaper for several minutes. I just sat there, staring at it, my coffee cooling untouched beside my hand. Something about the stillness of the folded paper felt sinister, as if the words inside were shifting, arranging themselves into something meant only for me. Eventually, with a mixture of dread and curiosity, I opened it again. The headline was back. But now it was my name. Just my name. Nothing else. The letters were bold, dark, impossible to misinterpret. My breath caught in my throat. I read it again, blinking to force clarity. And when my eyes opened, the headline had changed to my address. Blink. It changed to a date. One I didn't recognize. Blink. A time. Blink. Then a single sentence, we haven't met yet. I felt a quiet, heavy pulse in my chest then, the kind that settles deep and refuses to leave. The apartment felt colder, like a draft had slipped in even though every window was closed. The rain outside grew softer still, barely more than a faint tapping against the glass. I ran my finger across the ink of the headline, half expecting it to smudge, but it didn't. It felt dry, permanent, ordinary. Yet the letters shifted again when my eyes drifted shut, rearranging in an instant when I reopened them. Something in me knew I should throw the newspaper away. Leave it outside, or burn it, or tear it into pieces. But another part of me, the part that couldn't look away, felt anchored in place. The newspaper felt like it was waiting for me to keep reading. I turned the page slowly, and this time the text didn't wait for my blink to change. It shifted while I was watching. It wasn't like the letters animated or moved. It was more like the page had always contained the new text, and my mind was only now being allowed to see it. The words slid quietly into focus. Turn around. The air behind me felt still. Cold. Empty. But aware. I couldn't bring myself to look. My body felt rooted in the chair, heavy and frozen, as if turning around would break whatever thin barrier kept something unseen exactly where it was. I blinked once more, unable to resist checking the page again. The entire newspaper was blank now. No text. No images.